help when the mic starts working. If you give the instructions again to bring people in, they'll start hearing stuff going on.
Am I hot? Looks like my mic is on now. There, that's better. So I'll repeat that because I know it wasn't mic'd before. Off on the side there's some laptops. If you take one of those things, you'll be able to use those laptops to ask questions of the speakers. You can also use your, if you have a laptop with you, you can use that as well if you're on the network. Go to productiveteamwork.com/CMS. productiveteamwork.com/CMS. There's a link there, there's a couple steps, there's passwords, there's fun stuff, but it's all explained there. The pass key is 2017. That's the main thing you're going to have to remember, and it's this year. productiveteamwork.com/CMS. It'll also work on your phone, on your native browser. It's a little bit entertaining to find things on it, but it will work. We'll be beginning in just a couple minutes. I believe we're also broadcasting now to people that are on this, on the voice part of this session on WebEx. And I'll give those instructions again for them if they didn't get it. If you go to productiveteamwork.com/CMS, it'll take you to a page from which you can log in to, you'll click on a little link there and you'll log in, you'll have to log into Think Tank, which is the tool that we're using for asking questions of the speakers. Also on that site, you will see as each speaker comes up, their presentation will appear and a place for Q&A. Also to the right of each presentation, if you look under the Documents tab, you'll be able to download a PDF version of their presentation. You can do that later if you'd like. I'll repeat that one more time. It's productiveteamwork.com/CMS. 2017. Passkey is 2017. There's lots of seats up in front here. This isn't church. You can sit in the front. A few logistical items I'd like to go over. If you're any place other than in this local area, you must be escorted in this facility. So the exceptions are here, the corridor, the conference center, the first floor elevator banks. There are some places here in the cafeteria where you can get to that do not need to be escorted. Other than that, you need to be escorted. Please wear your name badge that you got from the guard. Please wear that visibly. Access to the CMS information systems, technology systems is forbidden, although those are logged in for your use if you'd like to use those. Couple of safety things. If there's a fire evacuation or a shelter-in-place event, we will give you directions. In the event of a building evacuation, assembly area 19 in the CMS parking lot. Assembly area 19, and we will do a roll call out there, so don't take off. If that should happen, hopefully that won't happen. While we're working today, if you need to leave, please use the rear doors. It's less bothersome to everybody else if you slide out the back door rather than the front doors. If you have a mobile device, please put it on mute or vibrate only or whatever you do. Noise out there in the auditorium does carry, so please keep your voices down if you're in there. We'll try to monitor that and keep the doors closed. We're going to break for lunch at 11:45 and come back at 1. Restrooms are located in the hallway just outside the exhibit area to the left. I think that's all. I'm going to repeat it once again. For those of you that want to go online and ask questions of the speakers, you can do so with your phone. It's a little challenging, but you can do it with your phone. Better to use these, if you're in the building here, use these computers. There's several of them still available. Grab a laptop and take it, and you'll be able to, it's already logged in, it's ready to go. It'll be easy. And you can post questions of the speakers. And when you get on, you go to productiveteamwork.com/CMS. Productiveteamwork.com/CMS. You'll ask me later. The passkey that you'll need a little bit later is 2017. With that, I think we are ready to begin. Any questions out there? And I would like to begin by introducing our CTO, George Linares.
Let's start from the top.
Okay. You want to put that on? I didn't mic him up, so one moment, please. Let's put it up there, I got it.
Hello, hello,
It'll come up.
hello. Can you hear me? Hello?
There you go.
Yeah, but that's the. I have to
You
hold
are
it.
Going.
Hold on. Not yet. I'm not ready. I gotta get it. Because this thing is not picking up.
It is. It's on.
Hello? Can you hear me? No, you see, you can't.
Here, let me put it here. Try it now.
Hello? Can you hear me now? Better? Okay, let's start from scratch. We're trying something new, so welcome to Convergence 2017, the third annual CMS IT conference. So I'm happy to see everyone here. There's a lot of things happening today, so hopefully you get to notice. So guess what? Innovation is happening more and more at CMS. Components across the agency are introducing new technologies. They're acting actually as the incubators for the enterprise, thus advancing CMS overall agency IT. And with that, the business is in a driver's seat. They are making decisions to address their own challenges and working with the enterprise to support them. But they are looking for solutions that are nimble and consumption-based. Pay as you go, as you know. And, across the agency also, there's a shift in changing in terms around technology now, to be more open and technology agnostic. It's still evolving as a greenfield of opportunities for new ideas and approaches, especially with the IT industry. As it evolves so fastly and new technologies are being introduced to CMS, we as technologists, we gotta be able to keep up with it, make them easier to use and remove the barriers for adoption. Of course, our federal staff is the foundation. We're working on a number of ways to inform and educate them on the IT of the agency, so they too can be engaged on this journey. And yes, our industry partners have a role as well. CMS is sharing with you its direction, its vision, so you can help us get there, but more importantly, move the agency forward. So, we have to do our job as well at CMS. And we're trying to do that, trying to communicate. There's many ways to learn about CMS endeavors and activities. All of these forums in here are there for you, and I see many of you attending those. So let's get the word out. Today, you get a chance to learn more about CMS. I encourage all to participate, ask questions, send tweets, hashtag CMS Converge, and make the most of it. Of course, visit the exhibitors. With that, I have the great pleasure to introduce CMS's acting CIO, George Hoffman. Are you mic'd up?
No, I'm not.
Let's get him mic'd up.
All right, I think we just accomplished the most difficult part of the whole day, transferring on the microphone. I don't know about you guys, but I've actually never seen my face that big before, and not a fan. So we could just like advance the slide to something else, please. So like George said, today I wanted to talk to you all about digital transformation of IT. And I think it's really important for us all to realize that that is not a project. It is really the center of our business strategy in everything that we do. As acting CIO, I am responsible for enterprise development and integration of IT systems. Those systems support agency-wide functions, including, the business and IT transformation, applying risk-based strategies to all the work that we do. I'm also a little bit of an agile evangelist, kind of thrown in at no extra charge, and no extra pay, actually, as I think about it. So, But anyway, I do have one of the coolest jobs at CMS. The reason for that is that I get to see the best ideas, the best technology, the best thoughts realized into action across the entire CMS ecosystem. And it's really pretty incredible, the work that we do and the breadth of the work that we do. But we always want to look at ways to get better. And some of you who have been around a little while know that as a leadership team, we're doing a whole lot of work right now with lean management, where we are always asking the questions, what can we do better? How can we do it better in incremental fashion? And looking at the IT and what we do is really a big focus for us, because everything that we do, all the business that we do across the agency is impacted by IT in some way or another. And the neat part about seeing all this activity is that I get to see business and technology converging together. Hashtag shameless plug. So anyway, to that point, one of the messages that I think you will hear today, a consistent theme that's going to run through a lot of these presentations, is this shift in thought process, this shift of focus to look at doing things using agile methods. It's not that what was working in the past, wasn't good. It's just that we think that we can do better by making sure that we're bringing business, technology, and thought leadership all together and constantly informing those activities through, feedback, constant feedback from the user, never losing sight of that, and making sure that they're engaged throughout the whole process. I think that you will see some of the benefits in the presentations that you hear today, where you've seen teams that have actually adopted some of those agile principles and are actually making it work, and it's affecting in a very dramatic and positive way the work that we're doing in the agency. We're also learning about setting different expectations. And this is where everybody gets nervous. What? Different expectations? No. Yes. Really, I think that it's important for all of us to understand that delivery excellence is really the price of admission. That's where we set the bar. That's where we start the conversation. That's not an end point. Automation is king for continuous integration and continuous delivery. This is a big area of focus for us, making sure that we automate, because it's just too expensive and takes too long to do a lot of this work manually. So as we're exploring DevOps and some of the other practices that we're adopting, you really need to be thinking about how can I do this in an automated fashion so that we can spend all of our time and ingenuity on the interesting stuff, which is building business functionality. I think that making sure that everything that we do delivers value to the end user is another point of focus for us, and transparency in all the things that we do. It's really kind of funny as we get into these conversations with different programs and people are really focused on, hey, look over here, don't look over here. Well, you know what? Transparency is actually one of those things that will set you free. Being honest and open about what's actually going on will allow us to make good decisions. Doing incremental delivery allows us those checkpoints to make sure that we're on target. Anybody been on a program that never changed? Show of hands. One lucky person, all right. Absolutely the exception, but I think percentage-wise that probably works out considering how many folks we have in the room. Everything changes, Agile methods really focus on how are we going to adopt our plans to the changes that are inevitable. Oops, let me switch pages here. I promised George I would try and stay on script, which is painful for me. Another theme that I hope that you hear in the stories today is, who are we doing this for? Why are we doing all this stuff? And for some folks, I hope this is not a revelation, but I think for most of you it'll be an affirmation. It's about the people. The people at CMS, all of our vendor partners, and the end user, the American people who actually wind up benefiting from everything that we do. And this isn't just a buzzword, it's really something that's really evolutionary for us, is that putting the user at the center of the experience in everything that we do. If you walked in and took a look around in the lobby area, you're going to see these little signs about CMS Employee 2.0. For years, we've made folks jump through hoops to go around all the different technology, the vendors, the contracts, the different tools that we have deployed, never thinking, wait a second, shouldn't we be focusing on making that user experience simple and easy, regardless of who is doing the work? Instead, we focused on hey, here are the different things that you have to do in order to get connected. So a lot of changes are going on. If you have a chance to talk to the dozen or so vendors that have been involved in the CMS 2.0 initiative, you can really find out how this collaboration, bringing things together, really has made a difference, not only for the work that they're doing, but also for the end user, the CMS people who benefit from it. As part of our digital strategy, we are fearlessly looking for innovation from you all. And the you all I'm talking about, just a show of hands, how many people in the room are feds? How many feds? All right, how many vendor partners? Cool, that's a pretty good mix. And the interesting part is I'm never going to ask that question anymore, or at least not today. Because as we're working on these projects together, what's important is that we have this concept of innovate. It doesn't matter where the idea comes from, okay? What matters is that we identify the best idea, the best solution, okay? And a lot of times we focus on, well, this is what CMS asked for, don't worry, we've trained you to do that. But what we're looking for is to have that dialogue about what's the best way to solve the business problem that I have. Not necessarily, hey, I'm taking your order, what is it you asked for? You asked for 6 of those, I'm gonna give you 6 of those. Whether you use them or not, hey, I don't care. When we're focusing on making sure that we're delivering value, we're going to make sure that we are pulling out the best idea. And innovation may have to come, you may have the unenviable job of being the person who has to say, I know that's what you asked for, but I think what you want is this. Is that okay? And test the idea and do that in incremental fashion, because you know what? You will actually benefit, and so will the customer, right? From doing that, because ensuring that they're actually getting what they need. I wish if I had thought of the graphic earlier, anybody seen the tire hanging from the tree? The swing, this is what the user wanted, and you see all the different permutations of what was possible. Ultimately, it's about solving the problem, right? I just need a tire hanging from the tree to swing on. So keep that in mind as you're having your conversations with your CMS partners, and make sure that you are bringing the best idea, not just what they asked for. We're also looking at the fact that our business components are also, they're software implementers as well. And as a result, we're taking a look at all of the things that we have in the ecosystem around governance and getting permission to do things. George Linares and I have had a lot of deep conversations about saying, hey, TRB is a wonderful thing. If you guys have never done a TRB consult, you owe it to yourself and to your program to go do one upfront early, right? Because I can't tell you the number of times that people come running into my office late on a Friday saying, I gotta have this ATO, we gotta go live now. And then I get out my epic-sized pin and I go pop, and I burst their bubble because there were T's that they didn't cross and I's that they forgot to dot. And that's not fair to them, it's not fair to me, it's not fair to the end user who's not going to get that system going live because people didn't engage up front to do the hard work of figuring out, hey, what is it that I have to get done? Let me make sure that I'm talking to the TRB early, because if there are better ways that I can engage in the project and get this done, I should be doing that. So that way, when it comes time to go live, it's kind of a boring event, you know? This is like, hey, you know, get out the champagne and not worrying about what was happening behind the scenes. We should make sure that we're doing our diligence and getting there early. So anyway, today is an opportunity to learn, to discuss, exchange experiences, have suggestions, hear opinions, the war stories about what's going on across the ecosystem. Feel free, ask questions, make sure that you actually understand. The whole point of us doing this is to have successes that have happened across the agency with CMS people and our vendor partners working together. And it's about showing you the art of the possible. What can actually be done? How is life going to be different if I just try working in a slightly different fashion? It's definitely out there, okay? And let's make sure that we're really focusing on that innovation and helping to solve our business problems. When you go home tomorrow, take what you've learned here today. Strive to do things better. Question how we do things. Question how you do things. Don't be afraid to ask the questions, okay? It's much better to have the questions asked out on the table and deal with them than to wait and do it after the fact. You know, as we start looking at how we increment, you know, I'd rather have people make a mistake quickly, because then we can do something about it, instead of making a mistake and never talking about it, and then you get further and further away from what we need, and then have to come back with a very painful experience of getting back to the center line up front. So we're not joking when we talk about, you know, if you're going to fail, do it quickly and in small increments. But make sure you're having the questions, make sure that what you're delivering is actually what people want. So in closing, we're doing this event to share all the different capabilities, whet your appetite for the different things that might be possible here at CMS. You know, the important part to know is that everything you're going to hear about today isn't theoretical, it's something that's already been done. So I hope, my hope for the day is that as you're sitting out there and saying, hey, I wonder if I can do that in my program, you know, yes, you can. Make sure you talk to your peers, because together we'll figure out how to do that, okay? So just want to say thank you for the time, enjoy the conference, and don't forget, ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Well, as our next speakers are making their way up here, hopefully, I don't have much to say otherwise. I'm going to remind those of you on WebEx, those of you here, I still see some laptops available. Please take the laptops, because it's the way we're going to ask questions today. And let me bring up the presentation here. If you are online, you will see the presentation, and I'll bring you in a second to a place where you can post questions. There's two areas out there under your agenda. You'll see a place where the presentation is. You can browse through that. Underneath that will be the place to ask questions. Again, I'll repeat how to get to that site. It's productiveteamwork.com/CMS. And from there, the pass key that you'll need several steps in, the pass key is 2017. And speakers, you should also see, I'll bring you to it, but you'll see a presentation coming up here in a second. I'm sorry, not the presentation, the questions. And you have a little clicker right there to move your slides. Okay? Here we go. So I'd like to introduce Drew Scaraccio, Stephen Veneruso, hope I'm doing okay on these names, and John DeCluse, all talking about CCQS, changing the game, DevOps, and microservices.
Good morning. How do we turn the mic on?
Let's see if it is on.
Can you hear me out there?
Not yet.
Not yet. Let's see, switch.
They didn't give me those instructions.
Testing.
Got it. I think I got it.
There had to be a switch somewhere.
You now have hot mics, I believe. Try it out.
Good morning. My name is Drew Scaraccio, and to my left here is John Duclos, and to my right is Steve Venarusso. And this is the agenda we have. All right. Oh, the right one, that's what I'm doing. Press it. Ah, okay.
One moment, please.
Okay.
I think you hit too many buttons over there. Let me show you again. Big picture of George again for all of you. For some reason, it's not wanting to go to that screen. Let me move it, please. I'm going to close it and open again. Isn't PowerPoint fun?
So you're saying this is the back. Gotcha.
That's interesting. Anybody a PowerPoint? Any IT people in here?
Reboot.
Yeah, right. Why will it not let me do that?
And that completes our presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much, everybody. How about I just do it this way? We'll walk through it. Hopefully we'll fix it for the next one. Oh, we lost our connectivity altogether. I see the problem. One moment, please.
Well, while you're working on that, I can do some introductory comments. How's that?
All right.
Okay. My name is Drew Scaracchio, and I work in ISG in CCSQ. CCSQ is going through major changes in how we deliver value to our lines of business through software development and data center operations. Through the leadership of Steve Davidson and Mark Plauger, ISG has created a playbook. The playbook forms a strategic alliance with the CCSQ goals, mission, and vision, and also aligns with the HHS strategic goals. We have focused on 6 strategies for the ISG playbook. A data strategy for information that is accessible, timely, and secure. The second strategy focuses on the user. User-centered design for high-quality and user-centric solutions. The third strategy is a move to the cloud. We have a completely operational hybrid cloud today, and we're moving towards self-service provisioning for our developers. In fact, about 4 or 5 weeks ago, we had a major milestone where one of our application developers was able to stand up an entire environment in the cloud in 15 to 20 minutes. And that was in a sandbox environment. And we're working on that from the sandbox all the way up to production, and we're hoping to have that complete by December. The fourth strategy is a move to open source. Jenkins, Ansible, JBoss, PostgreSQL. If they're not being used today, they're being stood up very soon. And we continue to look at other open source software and evaluate the software and the tools that might be available. The fifth is a move to agile development. ISG has awarded contracts for hospital quality reporting, end-stage renal disease, and enterprise services to agile developers. So the sixth one is a move to a DevOps model, which Steve Venarusso will cover next. So those are my opening comments.
Always have a backup laptop.
Oh, good. Very good. Okay. All right, we're all set, right? Looks like it.
Try the right arrow. You're trying a different button.
This one right here, right?
Yeah.
That's what I press.
I'll be damned.
Looks like fat finger to...
Let me try it again. Try it.
Try it.
It must be something with that device. Hang on a second.
Okay.
Yeah. That's the strangest thing. I tell you what,
What?
I think I can just move the slides for you.
Okay, why don't we do that then?
All right. Sorry about that, everybody. I think it's the device that I gave him.
Is this clicker? I don't know.
The clicker. A defective clicker. We'll get that fixed shortly. I'm going to put it back on this one. And we'll just do this view right here. Ah.
Okay, that's where I want to stay. All right, in Gene Kim's books, The Phoenix Project and DevOps Handbook, he goes into detail on what he calls the 3 ways. The 3 ways is a set of principles from which you can develop all the DevOps patterns to be used. And can you advance, please? Okay. The first way is the principle of flow. The idea is to set up a very fast flow from left to right, from business to customer, from the developer into operations. You can do that by making the work visible by use of a Kanban board. A Kanban board is a good tool, a big help to keep a fast pace to your flow. You can use a Kanban board to optimize your workflow and also unmask capacity-killing WIP, or work in progress. Too much work in progress just basically sits there and the work doesn't get done. Reduce batch sizes. Another way to improve the flow and to reduce WIP is to decrease the batch sizes of the work. We've got to get away from these application releases that take 6 to 9 months to develop, weeks to deploy into production, and sometimes months to get all the features working. Reduce the number of handoffs. Well, maybe you can eliminate handoffs if you create cross-functional teams, so there is no handoffs. But if you have to have a handoff, use automation as much as possible to eliminate the bottlenecks. Continually identify and elevate our constraints. The biggest constraint we have has to do with environment creations, and I'm sure we're not alone. When you try to promote from, say, a development integration environment up to a QA test, it sometimes takes us weeks to get all the configuration settings correct, not only for the application, but some of the software components that are a part of the architecture. Eliminate waste in the value stream. Extra processes, extra features that must be maintained, but nobody really uses them. Search those out and get rid of them. Next slide, please. The second way is the principle of feedback, to amplify feedback loops. The goal of continuous improvement is to shorten and amplify the feedback loops so that you can continuously make the changes that you need to. Use telemetry to increase your feedback loops so you have more of them in your flow. Okay. Find problems as they occur. The idea is to stop the flow when you do find a problem and get that corrected. All right. Thank you. Swarm and solve problems to build new knowledge. What comes to mind on this particular bullet is the Toyota Andon cord. The idea is when an assembly line worker sees a problem on the assembly line, there's a cord for them to pull to stop everything, and everybody figures out what the problem is. So they basically swarm, figure out the problem before they restart the assembly line. Same thing here. and you build new knowledge, a lot of times you might unveil a system constraint you didn't know you had. Keep pushing quality closer to the source. The quality of the features being developed should be in the hands of the people who know and understand the features. Avoid validation from managers who know nothing about the features, but it sits in their approval queue and just wastes time. Enable optimization of downstream work centers. Really, the optimization is don't push a problem down to the next downstream work center. Don't push a defect that you say, I'll fix on the next sprint, but now the next work center downstream has to correct with that. Oh, we're going backwards.
No, the other button. To the right.
I did push that. That's what I'm saying, I'm going backwards.
Oh, interesting. There you go.
All right. Third way is continual learning. Enable organizational learning in a mindset of experimentation and discovery. Experiment, take risks, even inject faults into your system. Find out where the system breaks and then fix it. That's how to make progress. Institutionalize the improvement of daily work. You need to create an atmosphere that it's more than just completing the work, but you're trying to continuously improve, the lean movement, that type of thing. You don't want to get into this rote, just completing the daily work. Always look for ways to improve things. Transform local discoveries into global improvements. Knowledge and skills, no matter how small or remote they are, should always be compiled and shared between the teams. You'd be surprised how you could provide one piece of information to another team that could lead to an improvement across the whole development pipeline. So always share and always compile those local discoveries. Inject resilience patterns into the daily work. There's a DevOps saying that says, fail early and fail often. What you should do is you need to subject your systems to fatal stresses to see how they react when they are failing. What comes to mind for me is the Netflix Chaos Gorilla, Chaos Monkey. The Chaos Monkey goes and kills processes and servers in production to see how the systems react. Very novel approach. The leaders should reinforce the learning cultures. No surprise here, it has to come from the top. The leaders have to set the example for curiosity and knowledge growth. And they need to build a culture of experimentation and continual learning. People have to understand that if they're taking risks, they're experimenting, they're not going to be penalized for that. Mr. Duclos?
All right. Can you guys hear me? All right. Good morning. My name is John Duclos. I'm a partner at Belize Technologies, and I'm here to talk to you about microservices and what we've implemented at the Center of Clinical Standards and Quality. Microservices is really not a new concept. For those of you who have been around and heard of service-oriented architectures, it's been around over 15 years. I think you're seeing an increase in popularity because the interfaces have gotten a lot lighter with RESTful APIs, and then also the provisioning of infrastructure to support these services on the cloud. So let's go ahead and get started. So why did we move to microservices? There was 4 top-level reasons. One, as Drew and George spoke about before, we need to improve the delivery and the release cycles. We need to improve and optimize how we scale our software. The days where you find out that your servers were down because the customer's calling through the help desk is not a good approach. We want to be able to scale on the fly, so that was one of the reasons for moving to microservices. We wanted to take an API approach to be able to reuse functionality and isolate the functionality for multiple applications, not just for one. And lastly, we wanted to improve the user experience. So we're going to dig into each of these in the next set of slides. All right, so improving delivery and release cycles. One of the things that we wanted to do is enable teams. As we know, development could get complex when you have multiple teams. We wanted to be able to isolate teams to be able to work on specific services as we build an application and have the ability to deliver value to our users incrementally. Traditionally, we would build big applications where we couldn't release the entire application until the whole application was developed. With the use of microservices, we're able to do that here. So here's an example of a facility dashboard on the left-hand side. I'm not sure if you can see it. We call it mega tabs. Each of those mega tabs is a microservice where we have dedicated teams that were working on that piece of functionality, and as the functionality is ready, you should be able to roll that out to the users. It's possible that the other functionality is not ready, but there's no reason why we can't go ahead and release to production to start getting feedback and adding value to our users. Some of the reasons, the other nice thing about having the autonomy of the individual microservices, not only can you have teams working on them, but they are individual deployable units. Traditionally, back in the day, you would have to wait for all the teams to complete their feature development, and then you would release to production. That would cause delays in the release cycles. With the microservices, they can each individually be deployed using Docker container technology and using DevOps pipelines. Okay, next slide. The second reason, we wanted to be able to scale and improve scalability. So traditionally, when we deploy an application to production, and during peak times, to be able to support the loads, we would have to scale the entire applications on duplicative servers, either by increasing competing resources on the existing server, scaling up, or scaling out by adding nodes to a cluster. Over time, that can get very expensive. When you scale at the services level and you have an application that's made up, let's say, over 100 services, it's possible that only 20% of your services are the ones that come under heavy load. For example, maybe at the end of a month when vendors need to get their data submitted. There's no reason we need to waste competing resources on the entire app that may not need all of that. We can actually scale at the microservices level because each microservices is individually deployable. It has its own environment that could run and enables this level of scalability. The next reason we moved to microservices was to take an API approach. Traditionally, with the big monolith applications, you would build a lot of functionality into one app. As you guys know, if you made a change here, then it would impact possibly another change in another functional area of the application. With an API approach, you isolate the functionality to a very unique or domain and separation of concern for functionality. So from a design perspective, taking an API approach to build functionality through APIs, not only does it give us a design separation of concern, but also it allows us to reuse that functionality not only for the targeted application, but if in the future folks need to get to the data, let's say the 2728 form, which is the ESRD entitlement form, you should be able to do that through APIs and not have to put in a service request and then someone has to go program that for you. So we wanted to take an API approach from the beginning, so then that functionality is reusable across multiple channels. One of the things to mention here under APIs, we are using the Spring Cloud on the end-stage renal disease program. The development lead and architect, Paul Saunders here from Mantech, did a nice job in implementing that. There are three major components with the Spring Cloud, and the Spring Cloud name is really a fancy name for the Netflix API. A lot of you guys watch movies. It uses a third of the internet bandwidth in the United States. This same framework was made open source and it's called Spring Cloud. We implemented it on the ESRD program. We have an API gateway that is responsible for security. It's responsible for intelligent routing. We implemented a service registry, which essentially, as you scale out these services, they kind of phone home to mom and say, hey, I'm here. If the load goes high, come and contact me and I'll be able to handle the load. And the last piece is called a circuit breaker. So the circuit breaker kind of works like your circuit breaker at home. Imagine if your microwave all of a sudden has heavy load and all the lights in the house go out. Well, that's not a good user experience. So the circuit breaker functionality works just as home. If you have a service that for whatever reason goes down, your entire application doesn't have to go down. The circuit breaker for that service triggers, and then you can give the user a good user experience. So here, that kind of leads to the next reason we went to microservices, to improve the user experience. So there's a concept of limiting the blast radius. Traditionally, if something went wrong with an application, we get the infamous 500 server error, and the whole application would go blank. With the implementation of microservices, we can isolate the errors to specific service, and we do not have to impact the user to use the rest of the functionality on the application. So in this example, if we, for whatever reason, we had issues with the Form 2728, the ESRD entitlement form, and the service went down, we can have when the circuit breaker triggers, we can have a friendly message that says the service is not available, but other tabs and other services in your application can continue to operate, and the user experience is maintained. All right, and last, microservices fits nicely in a DevOps model. George spoke about the ability to be able to do automation. We've established individual DevOps pipelines for each microservices. So if we have 20 services, we have 20 DevOps pipelines to do continuous integration, and then we have 20 continuous delivery DevOps pipelines to go to targeted environments. This provides stability. It provides the ability to be able to be predictable. How many times do we deploy an application into an environment, a new environment, and all of a sudden things are not really operating the way you expect it to? With the use of Docker containers and automation in the DevOps pipelines, we verify that that application is working through automation, and when we deploy to a targeted environment, we have confidence that it's going to operate because we've verified that running environment. And I believe that's all the slides I have. I'm going to be a little bold here and try to a demonstration. Internet connectivity is a little spotty, so let's see if I could get this going. Can I connect to the HDMI? Okay. All right, so we put together a little demo here. It's a made-up demo. Nothing's real about this. We have a front-end UI that calculates 2 quality measures, and it invokes an API gateway. Behind the scenes, there's 2 microservices, one for calculator 1, one for calculator 2, and then there's an aggregator that they use the data from. So hopefully the internet's cooperating, and I'll be able to show you that.
Just to say, those of you that are online will not be able to see this demo. Sorry.
So if you can see here, I just started some traffic. The right box down here is the internet. It's coming into our AWS instance. When I drill in, you guys will be able to see that we have multiple calculators here. Calculator 1 and 2 are in the middle, and then they invoke the aggregators in the back. So I am simulating traffic right now that's operating through our AWS. On the front-end application, these 2 measures, I'm going to go ahead and invoke. You notice a calculated 75% rate, and then measure 2, 50%. Measure 1 is calling calculator 1. Measure 2 is calling calculator 2. Now I'm going to be really bold, and I'm going to take down one of these. We're using, in this case, we're prototyping ECS container services on AWS. I'm going to go ahead to calculator 1, and I'm going to take down all of those nodes. Don't ever do this at home, but just for the purposes of simulation. So that's going to go down. It's going to gracefully go down. A couple of these nodes will start disappearing for calculator. Let me see, which one did I stop? Calculator 1. From a user experience, when I click here, you notice it failed, and it said the service currently is not available. The user experience is still, you can maintain it for other measure computations, in this case, calculator 2. Now, we've set up for our ECS instances to automatically recover. So at some point here, the clusters for calculator 1 should start coming up if things go right. And I'll just come over here to the front end and see when it comes back up. Any jokes, Steve, while we wait?
You have a joke ready?
All right, there we go. So calculator 1 came back up. It was able to calculate the 79%. And if you guys come back here, you notice that the instances, the container instances came back up for the calculator 1. So that was an example of automatic failover, keeping the user experience during that failover and then being able to come back. And behind the scenes, the user, most likely all they had to do was refresh and try that computation again. In the traditional days, there would have been a call to the help desk, the application would have been down, and that user experience would have been good. And then the cost associated with tracking that problem all the way through, it eventually gets to the development team, is very costly. Now with automation and the automatic failover and scaling, we're able to automate a lot of that. So as George mentioned, we can focus on feature development and bring value to the users, bring value to the clinicians and the beneficiaries that we provide services for. And with that, that's all I have. I'll turn it over to Steve.
So returning to the presentation, what slide are you on? I can tell the people online.
The left clicker.
Can I use this?
Yes.
So I feel like a caged tiger sitting there. Is it operational?
Should be now.
Okay, excellent. Thanks. Okay, so DevOps. As Drew already introduced, I'm going to change tack here. Since we've had a demo, I'm going to do story time and take this down a little bit a different level to the individual, the team level, and then the organization. And I think this is important because it's a complex and very integrated subject. And each of those, it's going to start simple and get more complex. So from an individual level, it has been my experience that inspiration does not abide the 9 to 5. I'm an night owl, so for me that means waking up at 2 in the morning with the great idea. In the traditional model, what that would require is either me to go back to sleep or make chicken scratch on a page next to my table, or wake up, or actually log in to the systems, the development systems that are currently being developed by my team, and make an interesting career choice at 2 in the morning to develop live without conferring with the team or the PM. In the DevOps model, conversely, I could actually log into the system and order up an exact replica of my entire development environment, separate and apart from what's already there. And I can do that just like ordering a pizza. And just like ordering a Supreme pizza, it'll come with all of the fixings. It'll come with Active Directory integration if we're using AD. It'll come with all of the infrastructure and enterprise services tools. And unlike the pizza pie, that entire environment, as Drew alluded to, will be delivered in half the time of the pizza. So for an individual, what that means is rather than waiting for the morning, which they may not recall, you may not recall the details of your great idea, you'll actually be able to have a coding vendor at will and go into the PM in the morning with an answer. Is this a hypothetical or is it actual theoretical? Actually be able to walk into that meeting and discuss with the team, is this a good idea? And put it in front of the team to decide which direction to go. From the team perspective, to take it up a notch, in the traditional model, the PM has to of course, is burdened by the triple constraint. If somebody comes in with a hypothetical idea, maybe a great idea, but the risk is going to be high, and the probability will probably be ranked low. That great idea may never see the light of day. With the DevOps model, if a great idea is brought forward, whether it's been vetted overnight, over the weekend, or if the team has come up with a split way of doing that week's sprint, the PM, instead of having to choose between those options and going with the highest probability to low risk, they will most likely, in the DevOps model, they will be able to consider actually splitting the group into two and having a competitive sprint. So the key there is, by the time they have assigned the teams in a competitive sprint, an exact replica of their development environment can be created under the DevOps model. So it's the agility that buys the PM can be phenomenal. I've seen this firsthand many times with development teams. The end result at the end of that sprint is, instead of having one high probability, low risk outcome, the PM is actually faced with two, and much better code usually results. So some of the keys there is the increasing velocity, being able to deliver in a replicated environment in under 30 minutes, the agility of the infrastructure, self-service capability. They don't have, in all of those cases, they are ordering that online without actually having to put in a ticket, without having to wait for infrastructure to call back. It is all automated and integrated. So taking that up yet a further level to the organizational level, the examples I gave was really more in the lower environments. This extends through to production. So in the production environment, as we heard from John about microservices, we can launch entire environments, be it a single microservice. The developing organization can launch a microservice to replace, instead of having to actually troubleshoot. It's always easier to replace a known good than to troubleshoot. But they can also drop containers, entire machine images, and of course, entire virtual private clouds. And all of that can actually be done within an hour. So troubleshooting and code promotion through the pipeline is greatly made more efficient. Another major advantage of the DevOps model is, rather than having to have a patch weekend, taking everything down, you can actually use patched machine images and put those into the pipeline. The quality control, all the regression testing, integration testing occurs along the normal development path, integral to the development. So it does not interrupt the production environment, and it does not interrupt the developers. So it allows, when it's all brought together, it allows continuous integration. It allows testing and integration of code and environments, and all of that can be done automatically and integrated with all of the enterprise services, infrastructure services, and it can be done self-served very quickly and repeatably. Whoops. Part of the DevOps model, of course, is that you get to see the entire environment all the time. You don't have to go into a NOC, you don't have to go into a SOC, and you can see every aspect of that environment along the chain. So you can see from the end user all the way through the database. And these are automated tools, automated regression testing, automated tools that you can actually see the applications along the development pipeline to ensure that the code that's going to be released or re-released is sound. This is just examples of some monitoring, proactively identifying microservices and containers. And the shared service in the DevOps model, most of these things are familiar. But the big difference here is most of them are automated integrations. So when a machine image is deployed or a virtual private cloud from the ground up is deployed, infrastructure individuals don't have to go in there and integrate with all of these systems and tools. All of these things come up within minutes. All of these services are available. And that's it. Thank you.
If you could switch to this screen, please. We have some questions from some of you and from the folks online. Number one, how is CMS preparing to understand and evaluate innovation in proposals so incumbents and competitors are encouraged and incentivized to look for ways to automate, reduce cost, increase user satisfaction, etc.? Many times your RFPs talk in the SOW how you want new ideas. When you approach bidders, they are not interested because they do not believe we will give them a competitive edge, as Section M evaluation criteria makes no mention how this will be evaluated. It's a long question.
I can try to answer that, but I am not really a contracts person, and that's on purpose. I don't want to be a contracts person. But I know what we've talked about before is basically a fixed price contract, where basically you can innovate, and if you can, basically create the solution for less than what the price of the contract is, you get to pocket the difference. That's what I've heard. That's the direction that we consider going in.
Okay. Number two, how are you evaluating on any project whether Agile is really delivering on its promises? How are you measuring success? Is this consistent across CMS components, or is each doing their own thing? If yes, how are you making that happen?
I would say CMS components we're each doing our own thing. Not that we don't share information, we do. I will say whether Agile is really delivering on its promise. I think the piece that's missing there is Agile with DevOps. We've had contractors before that worked in an Agile methodology, but we still had the old structure where basically they had to do these handoffs so it really has to be coupled Agile with DevOps. That's my own opinion.
All right. Number three, can you share how your team coped with unpredictable and highly volatile rulemaking, policymaking, and erratic clearance processes while still making progress in delivery of features even with unstable requirements?
So we can't control the rulemaking process, but what we can control is the delivery process. We can control the technical environment. So when there is a change that comes in, we can turn that relatively quickly around. As Drew indicated, using agile practices, we do shorten the feedback loop. So if we're in the middle of a development cycle, you're not going to go longer than 2 weeks before you can introduce a change. So again, we can't control rulemaking. We understand that is a byproduct of our environment, and I believe that's one of the main reasons for going to Agile and going to these DevOps tools, so you can be able to adapt to change, inspect and adapt.
Thank you. How do you best document all the elements of a defined microservice? That's number 5.
How do you best document? So one way to document the interfaces, because what's important in documenting microservices is really how are you going to use it? How are you going to consume it? So there are tools out there such as Swagger.io where you can publish the interface to your microservices. This allows other developers to be able to see the responsibility of your service and then be able to understand what are the inputs to invoke that service and what are the outputs that they're going to get. It provides for you a structure, a data structure and objects on how it works. To us, that's been the most valuable piece of the documentation. In terms of the services, since one of the objectives is to keep them small, hopefully the code within itself is readable and you can see how it's documented. But the valuable documentation here would be on the interfaces.
And I think for some unexplained reason, I skipped number 4, didn't I? How do you identify potential conflicts when multiple services and their unique DevOps pipeline teams need to do work on a shared resource in the same time frame?
So a lot of that can be avoided through planning, architectural planning, and identifying how you're going to break your application up into areas of responsibility, domain areas, whether we're talking about patients or we're talking about facilities or providers. During that time, you try to identify what are going to be those dependencies, what are going to be those shared services, such as security. That was a common service that we had to implement through OAuth. So regardless of all of the microservices we implemented, we all coordinated and identified, hey, before anyone can invoke any of these services, we need to make sure it's protected. So we coordinate that at the beginning during the planning. For those that implement SAFE, you can do that during the program increments and identify what are those dependencies so you can work on those first and then get those built out, and then the subsequent teams can consume them. Now, obviously, there's going to be scenarios that come up that you didn't plan for. And again, at that time, since we are only working in 2-week increments, we're able to identify those dependencies and maybe prioritize them for the next iteration so we can handle that dependency.
Okay, and I think someone said audio is down for remote. We'll deal with that at the break. I think we've got it. Thank you, gentlemen.
All right, thank you.
On our agenda, it calls for a 15-minute break. We're about 5 minutes over, so let's go ahead and allow you to take the full 15 minutes. We'll see you back at 10:20. 10:20, please be prompt.
Yeah, because he does the flippity thing.
No, well, we can just make
You have my slides, right? You have my slides, right? They're ready to go up. Okay.
Please take your seats. We're about to get started. Please take your seats. Okay. Please take your seats. Also if there's extra laptops, there's some over here. Grab a laptop so you can pose questions to the speakers. I'll give that right now. Stand by.
Okay.
For those of you online and those in the room, if you'd like to, there's laptops available already logged in. If you'd like to access the website directly from your own device, go to productiveteamwork.com/CMS. productiveteamwork.com/CMS. It'll give you a thing to click on. You'll go to another site and there next question you're going to ask me is what's the passkey, and the passkey is 2017. For those of you online and those of you looking here, you'll see that the presentation is item number 5 on the agenda, and the Q&A is item number 6 on the agenda. I've left the other presentations up there so you can still browse. And you can download those presentations there's a tab on the right that says Documents. You should be able to download them there from the presentation page. It's productiveteamwork.com/CMS. All right, our next presentation is Mr. Ray Wedgeworth talking about integrity continuum. And take it away, Ray.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to talk today, I'm not going to get into to IT specific things as much. I'm not going to get into technical details about the fraud prevention system and what we use within that tool. I'm not going to talk about Splunk and Hadoop and open source and all that. What I really want to talk about today is how to implement a system. How did we implement the fraud prevention system to help us to ferret out fraud, waste, and abuse, and how did we measure outcomes? How did we form teams and partnership to be successful? So that's going to be really the emphasis of this presentation. So about 4 or 5 years ago, we started off, and our strategic direction was that we really wanted to start moving away from pay and chase activities to prevention. So instead of going for overpayment recoveries, we wanted to make sure that we could detect and prevent a provider from staying in the program and revoke them when we see bad behavior as quickly as possible, or to suspend or create more elaborate edits that would prevent payments from going out the door in the first place, right? It really gets my goat sometimes when you hear, a couple years ago there was a major takedown in Texas, right? A provider had billed Medicare $450 million, right? And people have often heard me say, the headline on that day is law enforcement does a great job in collaboration with CMS and others. Major takedown, $450 million, fantastic, and everybody's, yay, fantastic, right? The headline the next day is CMS allows $450 million out the door. Right, boo, okay? All right, so we really wanted to stop the bleeding, right? Ongoing investigations are fantastic, but we wanted to make sure that we stop the dollars from going out the door in the first place. Also, we want to move from one size fits all to a risk-based approach, right? So analytics, the fraud prevention system didn't invent analytics. Analytics was done all the time, and our program integrity contractors across the country, really smart analysts, a lot of rich data, would do analytics, right, and identify where there was fraud, but it wasn't necessarily on a national level. It wasn't prioritized. You didn't learn about what its outcomes were, and often it was a bit random. So you would find a provider that you thought might be suspect of some activity or another, right? And that random approach, it tends to hit a lot of providers, and you don't know if you're really focused in the right areas, right? And it creates burden on providers, because just because you found data that looks anomalous doesn't mean that necessarily there's anything going wrong. So you end up burdening the providers more and more, right? So we wanted to get more sophisticated with our data, get more data resources, do more predictive analytics so that we could better identify those that are the most egregious, where we have a better chance of not having a false positive, that we have something we can go after. So a more risk-based approach reduces provider burden, puts the right resources on the investigative activities, and then ultimately leads to better outcomes as well, financial as well as patient protection. The third thing is we want to move towards addressing the full integrity continuum with advanced analytics, right? So there's sort of a whole line of activity, right? There's things where folks just need to be educated a little bit about billing processes, all the way to intent and trying to defraud the government, right? So in there's a lot of other activities that are going on along that spectrum, right? The fraud prevention system, when it was first released, we were really focused on the most egregious actors, right? But we have started using and piloting it for other things so that we do interventions earlier on before it gets to that stage of being something egregious. And the last thing I want to talk about is that we did implement this predictive analytics system. So what did we learn, and what are some best practices on the implementation of a system like this? Going the wrong way. Here we go. Okay. Before I get into the fraud prevention system itself, I just wanted to, on this screen, they're smashed like this. They're like oval. But I see that they're circular here. That's good. So I first want to talk about overall CMS program integrity savings efforts. As I talked about, we really wanted to shift and make sure that we were moving to more prevention and less on recoveries. And in 2013, we had about $21.1 billion in Medicare savings from activities such as prepay edits, revoking providers, doing overpayment recoveries, referring to law enforcement, and those type of activities. And we had moved the bar from earlier years to be more preventative. So 68% of the dollars that were saved were due to prevention type of activities. And that would include the things like doing a prepay edit, putting a medically unlikely edit in place, doing the fraud prevention system that identifies providers and revokes them early on in their improper billing processes, rather than doing the pay and chase, going after recoveries or referrals to law enforcement, which takes a long time to recover, if we ever recover. So those are the types of activities we want to move to. In 2014, while overall savings decreased a little bit, and some of that was in recoveries, we still saw a bigger bump again in preventative type of activities. So 74% of our savings were due to preventative type activities. And the good news is we recently had a third, these are in reports to Congress. Our third report to Congress just came out at the end of June, and in that report, we increased the prevention to 84%. So, but full transparency, like George had said earlier, is that that's great, but we reduced some of the recoveries, right? So recoveries went down, so a percentage went up. But even when we control for that, the prevention activities did increase significantly. So we are up to that 84% mark. And that report to Congress can be found at cms.gov and the Program Integrity website. So you can go there and that report is available. That'll outline these numbers and our methodological approach and that sort of thing in a lot more detail than I'll do here. So overall, CMS is doing a pretty good job in moving towards prevention and a lot of great activity, and there's a lot more to do, but we're getting better at it, and the data that we have and the way that we're using data is significantly helping in this activity. But now I'm going to shift to a smaller portion of that overall number, and one of the things that we've been working on from an IT perspective is the fraud prevention system. So the fraud prevention system, it's a state-of-the-art predictive analytics technology, and it was required by the Small Business Jobs Act of 2010. And since June of 2011, we've been running predictive algorithms against streaming claims. The streaming claims are Part A and Part B claims. We're streaming about 4.5 million claims a day. These are prepaid claims. So like at no other time before, we're doing advanced analytics on streaming claims coming through. When they come into the system, we apply that algorithm, and then using a risk-based approach, it prioritizes where there's alerts on a provider. So all the alerts are on a provider, not a claim, but on a provider. Those alerts then go into what we call an alert summary report on that particular provider, and they get ranked and prioritized. And we have our program integrity contractors across the country. We call them our zone program integrity contractors and our PSCs. They come into the system every day, and they go into the system live, and they see the alerts, and they begin working those cases. And as they work those cases, they document what they're doing in that system. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, on how it helps us to learn and do machine learning to figure out which models are working best and so forth. So we've been systematically applying that for some time now on a nationwide basis for the first time. So these are the national claims. We can develop models for a specific geography as well as on a national basis. And that always is continuously fluid. Fraud doesn't stand still. We could have fraud in Miami-Dade for a certain period of time. Once we start shutting it down, it can shift to Detroit, Michigan, right? So we have models that control for that, and often we'll have to make adjustments based on geography. So as I said before, the initial focus was on fraud, abuse, and detection and prevention, but we're expanding that a little bit to do a little bit more in terms of that full integrity continuum, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. Okay, so an overview of the analytic investigative process. So this is a pretty simple diagram, but I want to talk a little bit about various pieces to this. As some of it goes back to, again, George's initial thing when he talked about partnerships and transparency and all of those things. We want to build all those things into this process. So the first thing, and one of the biggest lessons learned, and I'll reemphasize this later, you'll hear me say things over and over again, but the big thing is that when you implement any technology, you really have to understand the business, right? What are the outcomes that we're looking for? And in order to do that, we built in a process by where we could understand how our models are doing, where are the emphasis, what are the anti-fraud authorities where the end user, in this case our investigators, can actually take an action, right? So while I can sit in a room, in a back room, and I always say I'm a pasty-faced bureaucrat in a back room, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is so crazy, this doesn't make any sense, this provider's doing things that it can't be right? I can scream at my computer all day, but the folks that actually have to take information and then actually make it actionable and then go out and do it and use the right anti-fraud authorities and revoke a provider or suspend their claims, all of that. There's so many aspects to that and things that they need to have in order to be able to do that. It doesn't help for me to sit in isolation, right? So you got to get to the end user. And so we have created where we have interdisciplinary teams, we have clinicians, we have our investigators in the field, we have our policy folks, we have some of our own internal staff and the Center for Program Integrity. We form these teams around particular models. And we try to figure out what are the vulnerabilities we're most interested in. Is this model actually attacking this vulnerability in our system? and that team gets formed first, and then we prioritize what's going to go into the system, okay? That goes into the fraud prevention system, and we make sure that the information that goes into the system then generates a lead that has to be useful to the investigator. So how you present information back to the investigator is really important, right? If I use a predictive model, right, and for you statisticians in the room where an R-squared is important to say how strong the model is or isn't, that sort of thing, if I presented an R-squared back to an investigator, what are they going to do with that, right? So instead of that, we knew the model was strong, but what they're interested in, what are the characteristics of that model? So there might be 5 behaviors or characteristics. For statisticians, those are coefficients or whatever you want to call them. A lot of different names for that. But we wanted to lay out what are those 5 characteristics. And I'll use one model in particular, an ambulance model, right? Where the ambulance model, and I don't give away our models except for this one because we had to be able to talk to Congress and other people about what predictive analytics is, what we do with regression modeling and that sort of thing. But the ambulance model, right? So there's certain characteristics in that model that are important. So one is a trip to nowhere, right? So a ambulance company, we have the bill for the ambulance company. It says that they took the beneficiary to the hospital, but we don't have any hospital claim, right? So there's something amiss there, right? So that's a characteristic of that model. Or the average number of trips taken by an individual beneficiary during a week, right? That would be a characteristic. So if we get 4 or 5 of these characteristics in a regression model and they're predicting out potential fraud, we present that information back to the user, and then we say, okay, how's this provider doing on these 5 characteristics in their particular zone or nationally, to give back meaningful information to the investigators so that they have something to work with. We also provide back to them the claims that are related to the alert. So they know which claims, they know which beneficiaries are being served, and they know what kind of actions and outreach to take based on some of that. And they can drill down and do additional reports and things like that as well. So we bring that information, as much information as possible, back to the investigator. And then they also do some of their own post hoc sort of analytics as well. They have a lead and they look at other things. They look at, how many beneficiary complaints I might have had or things like that. So they triangulate and bring in any other information they might have on a particular case. Then they take an action and they record those actions in the system. So we know what activities are taking place, like a desktop audit and those sorts of things, or if they get to an administrative action where they've submitted for a revocation of a provider, that gets put into the system. So then we can use that system in the back, right, to predict out what's happening in terms of those particular, the model itself. It generated a lead, what were the outcomes, how long did it take to get there, all of those types of things, so we can continue to learn. If we have a model that's continuously setting up false positives, we have all these activities but no outcomes, then maybe we need to tweak that model. Maybe we need to turn that model off and try a different approach. So it's continuously learning. And fraud moves, the models change, and so we look at that whole process. So then when we're measuring outcomes, right, we're not just measuring the system, right? We're measuring, okay, here's the results of the system. How do those results end up in the business process itself? And how does it get to an outcome, right? So we're also measuring our ability to send something as a case to law enforcement and whether it gets prosecuted. We can see whether or not we're able to revoke a provider based on the information that was provided on that lead. So that's where we get into trying to calculate our outcomes and savings, and that information is also meaningful in terms of seeing how well we're doing and tweaking our models and continually learning as we keep going. Okay, so here are some of the model examples that are in the system at a very high level. So we have role-based models, right? So as an example, we have compromised numbers in the database, and a provider has a certain percentage of compromised numbers that generates an alert. So it's sort of a rule of, they have this X percentage, then it generates an alert and the investigator knows about that. That would be one role-based type model. Another one might be something that's related to geospatial. So you have a beneficiary who lives in Ohio, but they're receiving and getting billed for services that require a face-to-face in California, right? Shouldn't be happening, right? So of course those are examples of rule-based, but one of the problems of just rule-based is that often you can have a lot of false positives, right? Say that you had the beneficiary live in Ohio and you see that they're receiving services in Florida, right? Still needs to be investigated. We can't do anything with just data because it could be that the beneficiary is a snowbird and goes down to Florida and that's where they're receiving their services, right? So it has some limitations, and the false positive rate on just purely role-based are a little higher than these other ones. As I proceed down this list, the false positive rate tends to decrease as well. So the next type of model is an anomaly model. So an example here is that a provider with a particular type of, particular specialty, providing certain types of services, has far more services in a single day and number of service that 99% of a similar providers in a single day, right? So it's an impossible day thing, but it's also a comparison. We have models that compare within particular services certain behaviors and activities and billing activities for particular providers of a particular service type within a particular geography, and we look at anomalous behavior related to that. But of course, again, you can have a lot of false positives because you have people that specialize sometimes and their activity looks very different even though they're within a specialty group. They might specialize and be known for a particular activity and they get tons of referrals, so that might throw things off. So there's always still that potential for false positive, and it needs to be investigated. Predictive analytics, we typically use what they call structured data. Like we know historically who the bad actors were, and what we do is we try to model against that data to see what were the attributes or the characteristics that we see that would lead to that. So we had fraudulent ambulance providers historically, right? And some of the things we see is that there were trips to nowhere, right? And that's a pretty good indicator, good correlation with potential fraud. And so we would build out those models. So we would use regression, logistic regressions, and other sophisticated predictive analytic techniques to develop a model off of some known data resources. The good thing as we continue the system and we're revoking more providers, we're doing certain things, we can use as structured data the outcomes of the fraud prevention system too, so we can build that back in. So we've had where we revoked providers, but now we have additional information that we can model against. The last thing is network analysis. So what we do is we do a lot of different network type of models, but that would include models that would have all the known bad actors, and maybe they're within the same sort of network of providers in terms of who's referring to who. That case I talked about, and the $450 million, well, a particular doctor had a relationship with a bunch of home health agencies and was referring all his patients there. So if you looked at what kind of services he was actually performing versus referring, he was like 100% referring. That's all he was doing all day, right? So it's a little bit of an indicator there that he was referring, but who was he referring to? Then you look at the home health agencies that had that relationship, and then you wonder about kickbacks and other things, right? So once you know all of those entities and understand their relationships, that can help you in identifying leads for investigation. Okay, so the good news is that we don't just limit. It's not like there's one model per provider that they hit on. We have a series, hundreds of models that are in the system, and a provider can hit on multiple models and different types of models. And we've seen empirically where if they've hit on a rule-based model plus a predictive model plus a social network analysis model, the false positive rate really plummets, right? You get stronger as you're combining these models. So you're sort of nesting a little bit where you have a predictive model that already has 5 characteristics that they're hitting on, and then in addition to that you have some other models they're hitting it on, so it's all nested together on a national basis. It really helps us to reduce that false positive rate and bring a lot of information to the fingertips of the investigator to do their work. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the fraud prevention system's savings. So what's really important is to be transparent about your systems. When you're implementing a new system, what is it that you're trying to measure in terms of its outcomes? In our case, it was to measure things that would result in savings, where we stop illegitimate billings from coming into the Medicare program. So we got a bit of a slow start in our first year, but the first year we had an ROI, so it paid for itself, and we've continued to grow that year over year. Just in the past 2 years, well, we're in the third year now, and I can't release that number yet, but we saved $454 million in the third year, $654 in the fourth year, so it was over $1 billion just in the past 2 years, and that's really what's contributing to that $1.5 billion savings over the 4 years. Most of it came in just the past 2 years. So our calendar year 2015 return on investment is about 11.5 to 1. So the systems from this perspective, from a financial perspective, has been fairly successful. We have a lot of work to do, though, in terms of the amount of fraud that's probably out there that we haven't captured yet. We have quite a bit of work to still do. So this just gives you the return on investment. So it was 3 to 1 in year 1, all the way to 11.5. I rounded up. Okay, transparency, I rounded up to 12 for year 4. Okay. So some of the examples, so the ROI is important, right? But the other thing, I'm jumping to patient harm, it identifies things that you can't necessarily quantify from a number perspective, right? Beneficiary care and the right care at the right time is very important. And so when we do something, a model might not have a great ROI to it, but it does help a patient. That's just as important to us. So the FPS once identified providers from a neuropathy clinic that had questionable billing practices, and what they were doing is they were having beneficiaries come in a lot of times, right, to have neuropathy testing and so forth, treatments. And so they really exposed them to unnecessary risk of complications and potential harm. And we're talking about the Medicare population, right? So you imagine your parents, an 80-year-old, coming to a clinic and the hassles of doing that, but thinking that it's necessary and needed is really problematic and can be actually dangerous. So that's an example of a lead that resulted in some revocations. Another example, I talked about the ambulance piece because that's the example we like to use when we don't want to tell people about all our models. So we created something where we had we applied a predictive model, and we were able to, only after they only billed like $4,000, that it was already alerting. So we were able to take very quick action to actually revoke this company after they only billed $4,000, right? Of course, that's not as sexy in the media, right? So it's, hey, CMS, revokes a provider that had billed CMS $4,000, right? so we have to find a better way to talk about that because that's really important, right? Fortunately, one of the things, and I talked about these numbers, so I talked about these numbers. The good thing about these numbers is the Small Business Jobs Act of 2010 required that we present a report to Congress for the first 3 years of the program. And in that, they also required that the Office of the Inspector General, the audit division, come in and audit our numbers. Well, they didn't say audit the numbers. They used a new term, which they said certify the numbers, right? So it's kind of a new game for OIG to certify something. I mean, they do audits, right? But they were coming in and they were actually going to certify the methodology that we were using and ultimately the numbers that we were presenting, right? So one of the challenges for us is that we had an auditor and we wanted to start taking credit for, hey, when we revoked that provider at $4,000, we want to take credit for what they may have billed us over a period of time, right? And so that's difficult because you don't have actual dollars. You have to estimate out what that savings would be. But a real milestone for us was working with OIG. We came up with a methodological approach. CMS came up with the approach, and the OIG asked questions, and we worked together to get agreement that they would certify the methodological approach for cost avoidance. So we went through a process of identifying how we could capture and take credit for what may have been billed. That methodological approach, we're actually working on a paper that we'll put out on the website at some point pretty soon, where it lays out how we did that and how we calculate all of our numbers on that savings. You'll get a little bit of it in our reports to Congress, so if you go and search FPS reports to Congress, Google it, it'll come up. You can look at, and it'll tell you a little bit about the methodological approach, but we're going to send out a paper that has even more detail for folks, so that even the industry was very interested in how do we talk about what we've avoided. So it was a real milestone for us in the government, but also on the private side where they're doing these activities to be able to measure prevention, right? If we're all going to move to prevention, we got to figure out a way to measure it, right? So those are really great milestone for us. Okay, so recently we've implemented the Fraud Prevention System 2.0. So I think it's been almost 2 years now since we had a full and open competition to come in. It was the reason that we were doing the procurement was a practical matter of that it was a 5-year contract, and so the period of performance was up, right? But we also thought, well, now it's our opportunity to make some serious changes, to do some extra things that we've been wanting to do. And so we began that work. In February, we launched the Fraud Prevention 2.0. And also, I want to mention the contractors that we're working with. As George talked about, it really takes partnership between the federal government, our contractors, our end users, and ultimately partnering to make sure that our true customer, the beneficiary, is receiving the benefits of those partnerships. So Northrop Grumman is our primary contractor, and they have a lot of subs. I'm not going to go into all the subs, but they have a lot of their own subs that are partnered on this. Our model and analytic contractors are IBM, as well as the CSRA. Our modeling and analytic contractors are doing a fantastic job in helping us. And then we have our program integrity contractors across the country, which I'm not going to list them all out. But it's those partners, and then also the work we do internally with the federal staff, bringing those teams together to get to those outcomes. Almost everyone has a piece in that outcome, right? It's not the IT system that has the outcome, it's also the intelligence that's created by the modeling and analytics contractors that goes into that system that helps us get to that outcome. So I got to make sure the system can give the modeling and analytics contractors what they need within the system, the right tools, the right analytic tools, and all of that to be productive. And then I'm not going to get there in terms of true savings and outcome if I don't know the business, and I don't know what the investigators need, I don't know what our anti-fraud authorities we're going to be able to hit against to actually take effective action, right? So all of them have a stake in the whole process to get to outcomes, right? And I know that we put in some award fee things like that to make sure that we sort of align those. So we have a stretch goals and things like that to try to align each of those contractors to getting ultimately to those on the same page and to those outcomes. We have a lot of meetings, and I can say that it hasn't always been this way when I've worked at CMS, that we bring all of those contractors into a room on a regular basis, right? Because we have to have that end-to-end or we're not going to be successful. So anyway, so we've been working on the Fraud Prevention System 2.0, and these are some areas where we needed to improve and where we're working on improving. One is we wanted to improve the usability with better direction of investigative activities, right? So usability, one, we need to modernize a little bit more, better look and feel. We also want to bring better visualization to the end user community, right? We also wanted to help in develop models a little quicker and a quicker time to market. So one of the things we were doing in FPS 1.0 is that we are using our integrated data repository, which we still use today for a lot of our research and development. It has claims data, Part D data, claims Parts A and B. Back to like 2006. We can go in, we analyze data. It's really research and development. But what we had to do with FPS 1 is while we're streaming all these claims through, and it's an operational data store within the fraud prevention system, what we were doing is we do our research and development and that type of work in the IDR, then we'd have a bunch of JAD sessions, and then we'd rewrite the business requirements, and then the business requirements would go in, and then they would write the code within the system itself to operate, right? Well, now we're doing in-system type of development. So our modeling and analytic contractors are in the system itself. The data is there for them to model out, and then when they model out, we can even see what would happen if this model went in today, and it's not like a rewriting of code, you can actually use that code. They can write in R, they can write in SPSS, they can write in a number of languages, and then that information and that query will run, and so there's no sort of this sort of JAD process. There's a change control management, but there's not the need to like rewrite and have all these JAD sessions. So, and then when these models run in a mirrored environment, we can see what's actually going to happen, right? So before we go to production, we can give our users, which are the investigators, a heads up. Hey, this is really going to hit you in Texas, right? This is really going to hit you in this area. Be ready, right? So we can actually see what things are going to be coming their way once we release that particular model. So we're doing that now. We're on our fourth model release, and we're doing agile development and releasing models pretty routinely, and so our time to market on these models is definitely expedited. We also want to expand our fraud prevention system user group, so we want to include our Medicare administrative contractors and others, because once again, if you have risk and you have the most egregious at the top and you say, hey, you should be working the top 100, right? What's going on with number 102? What's happening with 150? What's happening with number 200, right? So they might be alerting, but they haven't hit some thresholds, things like that. So what do you do with all this information? Well, there's a lot of things you can do. One is you can work with the Medicare administrative contractors, give them information from these models. They can reach out to the providers and say, hey, this is what we're seeing, right? And you can see a real effect in doing that. We actually did a pilot with the fraud prevention system with one of the MACs, National Government Services, and we worked with them, and we took models, and we didn't have to create any new models. We just took those models that were of interest to them. They were able to see what those results were, and they were actually able to, once they've coordinated with our investigators saying, hey, we're going to take this for a little while, and it's not a high risk right now anyway, they would just make a phone call, right, and then send a letter to that provider, and just that awareness changed their behavior. And so we can see behavioral change just through information, right? That helps the provider get it together if they need more education, those sorts of things, and being alerted to something that's happening. And you have a lot of third-party billers too, right? So that sometimes they don't know what's being billed on their behalf. So it helps to it's a Hawthorne effect, right? So you put a spotlight on it, behavior changes. The only problem that we saw was that after we stopped sort of monitoring that, and stopped putting a light on it, some behavior started to creep back up, right? So you got to continuously monitor that type of activity. But expanding to the max to do those type of activities, we're looking at going forward with the fraud prevention system. So getting into sort of that education and more of the integrity continuum, we really need to reconsider. Maybe we should have a naming contest today and see how we need to name it something differently than the fraud prevention system, because we really want to move into waste and abuse. So maybe we'll have a contest at some point, try to rename this thing. We also wanted to expand our claim rejections based on billing policy and suspend claims for medical review, right? So one of the things that we can't do, and we don't have the authority to do, is you can't say, okay, Dr. Wedgeworth, you're a pretty risky guy, we're going to stop all your payments, right? You appear to be risky, right? You can't do that, right? So we have to go on policy, right? Mr. Wedgeworth, you've been providing services in an ambulatory surgical center, you've been doing surgeries there because we have the ambulatory surgical center claim, but then we see that you're actually billing for that beneficiary on the same date of service out of your office to get higher payment, right? We're going to reject that claim, okay? So building in edits like that, and it's not your normal editing. We really want edits that have a flavor of being fraudulent or wasteful or abusive, more on that end than it's just, a fat fingering and you did something wrong, you didn't do the right places. It has a feel to it because we have other systems that do a lot of edits. So we stay on that side of things that are meaningful from a sort of a waste and abuse and fraud sort of perspective. That information then, after there's a lot of rejected claims or denials, the investigator sees that as well. So that if Dr. Wedgeworth is having all these denied claims and he's learning on all these models, that investigator will have that information as part of their whole portfolio and tools of information that helps them in their investigative process. Oh, yes. How much time do I have? Yeah, close to zero. Okay, so real quickly, so that's pretty much the analytic approach that we use. This is where we're moving in terms of our fraud prevention system technology. And am I going backwards? Yes, sorry. Okay. So this is just a quick, so the additional enhancement we're talking about, you have unintentional things that happen, you have limited errors of things, you have patterns of abuse and multiple issues, and then you have intentional or potential fraud. So we're trying to get along that continuum to make sure we're addressing each of those areas. So we'll really be expanding the FPS to include some of those things. Okay. So that's, I think I should end there.
If you've got more, if you have important things to say, it's okay.
Okay. All right, let me.
Questions too.
Yeah, so just real quick on some best practices. You have to have a governance process in this stuff. I mean, we're drinking from a fire hose on all the things and all the vulnerabilities that are possible in the world, right? And we have some crazy ideas out there. So we're inundated all the time about, did you see this? Did you look over here? Did you uncover this? Right? Well, you need to have a governance process to manage all those potential vulnerabilities, figuring out what you can actually do about them and that sort of thing to prioritize them for the system.
and all that effort paid a lot of dividend. And really it comes down to also, as Mary Carroll said, the transparency. I think the partnership that was there, Chris talked about people, process, and technology. You throw in a layer of partnership and complete transparency to the customer on everything that's good, everything that's yellow, everything that's red. And being able to, I remember instances when Chris Martin would call me from the parking lot of our organization saying there's an issue, because he would find out about it before I did, because he was there embedded in the team in real time along with everybody. So the transparency really I think made a big difference in allowing us to replan and continuing that activity.
Okay, thank you. So now we're going to get into a little bit of the technical execution of the actual transition. So one of the first questions is how do you manage the change in infrastructure and data center and its impact on security design and getting your authority to operate compared to the prior data center where it was operated from? Conrad?
This was one of the biggest challenges for me because I'm a very pragmatic person, and I always want to look at what are the facts on the ground and what's real. I began the process with when did we need an ATO, and worked backwards through the ATO process and identifying, based on the requirements, the number of days that were allotted and the like, and quickly determined that we were 3 to 4 months behind schedule at the time that I did the initial analysis. So right away, I'm sort of doing a panic, but again, very pragmatic. And as George noted this morning, when he talked about individual organizations presenting ATO packages at the nth hour with all kinds of issues, I did not want that to be the case. So what we did was, to identify the risks, we did a lot of soul searching and analysis about what it was going to take in order to meet all of those requirements and meet schedule. Meeting the requirements and meeting schedule. First off, we did managing expectations. We did there was a lot of new and innovative methodologies and approaches that not just implemented, but were demanded because the effort required it. Looking at from the security standpoint, there are poor documentation, security processes and procedures. Those are all risks associated with the assessing of the system. Well, we applied some new and innovative approaches to recoup schedule and get us a product that would pass CMS muster when it's evaluated. For the documentation piece, we actually brought in contractors who perform security control assessments to help us with the writing of our documentation. So we knew what right looked like and built our documentation based on those standards. We incorporated a great many people into our security meetings because, again, at the time that this began, the system did not exist. So there are a tremendous number of very complex questions that have to be asked and answered to help with understanding. So in that, helping with that understanding, we not only brought in the vendors who were actually going to be performing the security controls assessment on our environment, because again, the complexity of it, we wanted to make certain that they had a view of the system. You know, we essentially lifted up our skirt and said, hey, you're going to be a part of this because we want you to know what's out there so that we can get a better objective analysis of the system when it comes time, because they were there in the meetings. They heard the discussions. They knew and understood with this new technology how we got to where we got. You didn't have to waste time trying to explain to someone because it didn't quite fit their worldview. They had an understanding of why it was that we were there. Additionally, we brought in CMS, parties from ISPG. They participated in our meetings because there were a lot of instances where the infrastructure team, the database team, the security team were talking about how do we securely implement the system, and everyone sort of has the 80% view, and we needed guidance to say, if you do it this way, that will meet the requirement and get us to a more secure system. And that allowed us to advance as opposed to going through emails and discussions that carry on for weeks over the exact same topic. So we were able to advance there. We focused on security up front, putting it into the DNA of the system. We invited the CKIC team. They came in and briefed us on CMS's CDM applications and their narrative going forward with how they were going to be implementing that. So that's part of our implementation. We've actually met with them. That's actually, in fact, Monday we're going to be doing a follow-on to actually begin the process of implementing those things. So having the CMS security apparatus as part of our discussions and planning and execution, that facilitated us getting to a more secure design and technical implementation up front. High Glass has in its DNA security. Now also, part of the challenge is also, how do we do the SCA? When we talk about the security controls assessment, again, I told you at the beginning that we looked at the schedule and we said, given the existing processes and the mandates and the requirements for time, when are these things needing to happen in order to meet that date? Well, again, I said we start off, we're about 3 months behind. And looking at it, we said we're going to need to recoup additional time during the course of the SCA. So what we mandated was, as close to the time of occurrence, whenever the assessor identified a vulnerability, we were to immediately begin remediation activities. So there's not a lag where you go through a week of assessment, you get a report, then you begin your analysis. That happened as close to the time of occurrence as possible. That allowed us to recoup schedule. And at the end, we were essentially opening and closing vulnerabilities as close to it happening as possible. And again, this morning, George talked about, you want to know early about where the problems are. You don't want to find out late when the problems are. So our effort was to identify those up front as close to the time of occurrence. Once they're identified, fix them. That was the mandate. Well, the byproduct of that is that we were able to, one, we actually began the assessment 2 weeks late, 2 weeks behind schedule, because again, we began this process with a system that did not exist. But we were able to build the security apparatus and all the things around the system until it got to an accessible state. We started 2 weeks late. We finished a week early. There were 16 vulnerability findings. We closed all 16 findings. There were 8 POAM'd items from the previous system that we were also able to close out. And again, when it comes to managing of the expectations, because we had articulated to everybody, I had meetings with everyone to say, this is what we're going to be asking of you. But I didn't want to just come there empty-handed. My deal was, we want to help you help us. So with that, I said, I'm going to promise you a pristine package. All I's are going to be dotted, all T's are going to be crossed, because I want the decision-making and the assessment of our package to run as smoothly as possible. We delivered on that, and CMS was able to support additional considerations for High Glass in terms of time for review. So we were able to recoup time at every part of the process by the simple fact that we involved everyone in the discussions. We had real and pragmatic discussions about how we're going to execute this securely, and we were able to get our ATO in a timely fashion to be able to support the deployment of the system.
Thank you. So now we're going to talk, we've talked about planning, the challenges and the risks. We're going to talk about some of the other technical things we ran into. Kamal alluded to some assumptions that they had going in that weren't proved to be true. So I'm going to let Ahmed talk a little bit about the actual execution of the technical moves of the data to the data center and so forth.
Sure. I think we all covered earlier about what the project was about. It was about transitioning from an existing vendor who's supporting this for 15 plus years to a new vendor who has not done the operating system infrastructure support before for High Glass. Now add to that, let's put that it's also a data center migration, a brand new data center, cabling, electricity, cooling, networking with 15 plus different agencies integrating 20 plus different tools. I think 27 is what Ed said. So around 27 plus tools that needs to be integrated in this brand new data center. Now add to that complexity, we have the data center. Now we are going to the architecture. We are actually changing the architecture itself. So we had a 4-node production before with 2-node database, and now we are going to a 8-node production system, 4-node just for the databases. So the architecture was changing as well. And then Chris talked about, and I think everyone mentioned about it, this was a cross-platform migration. We are going from an AIX system to an open source Linux system. Now, the way they encode the data is different. IBM AIX does what is called Big Indian, and then Linux is Little Indian. What it means is basically I can't take the files, move over to the new system, and poof, it works. We have to do the translation. It's like English to Chinese. That's what we will have to do, which further complicated this system. And then we are moving to an engineered system, which is an Exadata system. Here, the traditional storage management, traditional operating system management, those things don't work. Now, it's a whole brand new skill, which Chris also mentioned about having lack of knowledge in this new system. So it was a complete engineered system, inbuilt storage, inbuilt network, operating system on top of it, database on top of it, application on top of it, and required a specialized skill to manage it. So adding all these complexities, and my friend here talked about FISMA high. So on top of it, we need to have a FISMA high system, which further complicated it. So I would say maybe it was pretty easy, Terry, to get this migration done. I'm just kidding.
I was just going to add to one thing Amit said. He said one data center, there were 2 data centers. One was our backup data center, so all of this got to be done twice.
Right. And then we have to keep the operations running and making sure that the operations are steady and smooth because we have payments to make. What Chris was mentioning about every day at least 2 billion goes out. Around 45,000 million actually transactions work. So we have to keep the systems running. Now this complexity of platform change, that was the first thing that Chris had mentioned was about the data migration itself. Now when we planned to do this initially, it was like moving out of your house, right? You're buying a brand new house. You have accumulated junk over 15 years. There's some data which we don't use, some things which we have to get rid of. When you are going to a new home, you try to think that you'll do a cleanup, make a reorg, get a good place, start from a good place. So quite lofty dreams, I would say at that point. It was an ideal situation, but I think what worked, the approach, Terry and others, the approach that we took was more of a hybrid approach. It was a waterfall with an agile method within the project itself. What I mean by that is we had testing going on for all the different activities and risk-based testing about what things were changing. And the agile approach was around the data migration itself. We did around 6 migrations before we actually did the production migration of the data. During the 6 different migrations, every migration, and kudos goes to the transition team, that's both the federal team as well as the contractors, to have that lessons learned ingrained in them, the continuous improvement cycle. Every migration we do, we go back, check what could be improved, what went wrong, how can we fix it before we start the next migration. So that continuous iteration of making it better, I think that helped a lot. So what we realized within the second migration, when we wanted to reorg and do cleanup and go to that ideal world, it takes time. We were going from, which is called O2O, Oracle Consulting Proprietary Method, to move the data, and this is 50 plus terabyte of data we are talking about. Copying each object over to from source to the target, and then copying each bit, that's trillions of bits, trillions of rows actually, over to the new system. That means we'll have to check every row, every data, every object, and I think we'll still not be comfortable. The first issue comes and we'll be looking back at what we missed bringing in. And I'm talking about trillions of rows. And we have to maintain the financial integrity of the data. The second thing we learned quickly in the second iteration was the timing probably won't work. it won't probably fit in the week, couple of days that Tess was talking about. We have to be up immediately and start processing the payments. Otherwise, it will impact the broader economy, actually. So we have to make sure that it's up and running and then immediately start processing and less downtime. So we assessed at that point about what we should do, and we went into another method, which is basically called Oracle XTTS. I won't go into much details, but all it does is you take the first-time data, and despite of cross-platform migration, you take incremental changes and move it to production, so reducing the downtime. Now, the way we were doing it, and CSRA was pretty anxious around that time because it was never done before in the world. We were going from a production to DR to a staging to the new production. And we were using a proven method. You can ask me whether it was increasing the risk, but we were using a proven method of RMAN, which everyone uses to back up their databases, but we were further extending its capability to do a cross-platform migration. And we were able to further refine it, and the result was that we were 15 hours ahead of the schedule during go-live and had more time to do validations. So a lot of testing more on the waterfall and risk-based about what's changing, what we should test, make sure everything works, and integration testing, the infrastructure testing, and then this agile-based approach for the mock migrations itself.
I think we talked a little bit about migration. It was really in flight. You're making all these changes at runtime and trying to learn lessons and adapt. I remember when we moved to XTTS, our first run with XTTS was over 50 hours, and we had a window of 16 hours to get to. So keep on improving the processes, seeing what could be done, and obviously Oracle was an integrated part of the team helping us. And then we ran into a snag, which was a defect, and it was identified as a defect in the Oracle code base for RMAN, which has been in existence for a long time, but it had never been done over a 50 terabytes of database. So the workaround wouldn't work. We couldn't drop 500 indexes and recreate them, because just recreating the indexes on this heavy-duty platform would have taken us 3 days. So we had to work with Oracle to get an emergency bug fix in the code base for RMAN to fix that problem. So it really was a thrill ride, I would say, and I'd be remiss if I don't say that I lead a lot of teams, and I've seen a lot of teams. I think our high-class team that we had on the ground, the 170 plus people, from day one, the passion that they have for the mission, and how ownership they take for the project. I know program manager Paula is here in the room along with some of our key players. Kudos to them. It's really one of the best performing teams I've seen who went through. And the production weekend, we were 16 hours ahead of schedule. Nothing went wrong. It was almost like, is this for real? Like, what are we missing? What more can we do? And we had to tell our people, no, you're done. You can go and get 6 hours of sleep now because, it's live. But it was such a great orchestra and symphony. The weekend we went production was amazing to see that happen, thanks to the efforts of the team and the partnership that we had with CMS.
Sure, and if I'll add a few words from an IBM perspective. Having been through multiple tech refreshes and replatformings over 15 years, IBM, we appreciate how difficult this was. Not only the distance, but re-architecting the application and moving from a P-series-based AIX architecture to Exadata and Linux raised the complexity significantly. We mentioned earlier that in any competitive proposal, you have to make some assumptions as to what you're going to do and what's going to be available to you. And as close as you get, those assumptions aren't always right. And what we learned, and we knew, but CSRA, working with CSRA learned, is we wanted to migrate the data out of our DR site to avoid production implications. But that DR site is not as robust as we would have liked it to be, and we had to come up with workarounds and alternative strategies. For this migration and conversion to be successful, we had to first get the data to CSRA's data center. So that was a major speed bump that we had, and I think our teams worked exceptionally well together to collaborate to come up with an alternative using a network attached storage device rather than doing network transfers of the data. We were able to do this and find ways to get around the problem without adding cost. Certainly you can upgrade an infrastructure so that your network now has the bandwidth you want, but that wasn't available to us. So we had to get creative. How are we going to get this data moved? We had some fits and starts, but CSRA had a very good plan to use a portable device. We got it installed in San Jose, and we're able to move that data using the portable device and generate the outcome that we all needed to see. So I think that's a real example of overcoming an obstacle and coming together as a team to solve the problem.
Yeah, and we have a couple other questions, but I think we're running out of time, so I want to make sure we leave time to get to your questions. And I'll let Mary Carol. Oh.
Can you put the...
Do you want to do the last slide, or do you want to do the,
Well,
want
we're
to go
gonna-
through this, or go through the questions?
We want to go ahead and go through the questions. I think.
All right, can we move this, change the screen to be the questions? You have a copy there, I'll start anyway. What are the risks, number one, what are the risks of assigning a contract for both hosting and application development to a single contractor?
So High Glass originally was a combined contract for both hosting and operations with IBM. About 5 years ago, we chose to split it out, expecting to get some efficiencies and maybe additional transparencies or whatever. So when we look back at the lessons learned from that, we decided that we could merge it back together. There were some things that were redundant. We felt we could achieve some savings, and in tight budget times, we opted to go ahead and do that. So we didn't really see a lot of risk, and we think we made a good choice.
Great. Do you have
just add to that, I think the biggest risk that from operations side that I see is segregation of duties. Between CSRA and IBM, we had a segregation of duties. There was checks and balances. Now we need to figure out how to make that work on when it's all one contract. But the checks and balances is now between CSRA and the federal team and our support contracts.
Okay, great. Number two, do you have a dollar amount of savings and benefits of moving the High Glass system from IBM AIX mainframe to an open source Unix Linux operating system based data center?
Ed, do you want to?
Dollar amount of savings, any estimate?
Well, it's not really an apples to apples because that wasn't the only change that was going on. It was a fairly significant dollar savings. I don't think I really want to get into the numbers, but because again, there were other things other changes we made. And of course, just combining the contracts right there, you've got, one PMO instead of two PMOs. So I don't think we could put a number just to the hosting part itself.
Okay. Number three, was the same data migrated multiple times as dry runs, or were there different data sets that each required a migration?
It was the same data set, same database which was migrated and continuously refined. I'll just add one more thing, because it was not done ever the way we did it between production to DR to staging to actual new production. We did do a pilot with a small set of database to remove all the kinks before we actually go into this bigger journey of moving all this 50 terabyte database. But it was the 50 terabyte database.
Yeah, it was the full live production data set. And again, just, the fact that it was that data, our rule was we are not going live or going to production weekend until we've had a clean run all the way through with, no hiccups. Or we sort of made the hiccups part of the plan if we decided that that was the best mitigation.
And the clean run that Ed talked about was not just a clean run for data migration. That's just a small component. It's you bring the data, load EBS, load all the tools, do the reconciliation reports. So we defined a clean run as end-to-end activity, and data migration was a component of that activity.
Okay. Number four, will CMS provide an FAQ and lessons learned of moving a CMS application from an IBM AIX to open source Linux Unix system data centers to other CMS contractors, including data center and work size, load sizing, et cetera?
Yeah, I think, we certainly put a lot of stock in lessons learned. I think we would have to sort of make it a little bit more generic, because a lot of the lessons we've learned are very much about this particular setup, but I think we'd be more than happy to provide that.
Okay. Number five, how much time did it take for the contractor to perform the cross-platform transition?
I mean, the overall transition time frame was about 72 hours again from end to end, including everything that I spoke about, from shutting the database down to bringing the archive logs, doing the migration, doing the EBS loading, doing the tools, and then doing your testing that was needed to make sure the total smashed and everything happened from a financial reconciliation perspective. So we had less than a 3-day window. We started at Friday, I guess around 3 o'clock, Mary Carol?
Yeah.
And we were done on Monday evening, Monday night.
Number 6, how many people were on the security team?
From the government side, well, the security apparatus involved a fairly sizable contingent, meaning that High Glass, for the support that we have, there's a mix of contractors as well as government. On the government side that supports High Glass, there's the ISO, there's a person who supports the ISO, and then me as the security lead. That's from the government side. But there were other parties who support High Glass security who work with the access management, because there are a tremendous number of auditable items that we have to do for this financial system. And there are support contractors who are there, and this is part of the additional challenge, because all of the operations that we do from an auditing and monitoring perspective, we had to continue those in the IBM High Glass, but also begin actively executing those in the new environment, because CFO auditors were going to be asking us, how did we do this during the transition period? So there's a tremendous amount of artifacts and activities that had to be developed and executed in both places simultaneously. So there's an access control team contractor, then there's the CSRA contract support element, and there's approximately 8 people, I believe. But again, it ballooned because we brought in additional personnel to help us with the documentation, with the processes, identifying all of the security risks and the like. And additionally, we brought in, who also supported us, were representatives from ISPG and the other technical elements. Duly noted.
All right. So why did CMS choose Oracle Exadata technology instead of other vendors like Dell EMC or IBM?
Yeah, I don't really want to get too much into the acquisitions aspects, but I mean, I don't think that we certainly didn't mandate that. It was just what was in the proposal that was accepted. I think that Exadata, both based in, sort of the sales literature and what we've seen in real life, does provide very, very good performance. So far we've seen, our nightly batch processing, I think on average is about 25% faster. And we haven't really had the chance to do a whole lot of tuning. We, as Amit said, we sort of had to move the stuff we had and not do a lot of cleanup. So I think I would anticipate, even more than that once we get a chance to do additional.
I think I can add to that. From the contractor who proposed the use of the Exadata platform, we knew the requirements that High Glass to have from a scalability perspective, timeliness perspective, performance perspective. And when we looked at the options available during the proposal process, working in partnership with Oracle, it was very evident to us that Exadata was the platform that could get CMS the scalability and the performance that they were asking for. And then frankly speaking, that aligned very well with how we like to proceed. I guess business and bids in general, think next now. Think what you can do better. Think what technology and innovation you can bring to your customers, not only on existing programs but on new programs.
Number 8, will CMS consider moving other CMS IT applications to open source Linux Unix platforms from legacy IBM AIX infrastructure?
I don't think that we can speak for all of CMS. I think that's just a matter of each acquisition as it comes.
Right. So I think the key answer there is our PWS was not prescriptive as to what infrastructure would be used. It was prescriptive in terms of what services and outcomes we needed. We chose a vendor. We chose a contractor, not infrastructure.
Okay. Number 9, are there any particular items in the High Glass application which made it a good candidate for moving to an open source platform?
The HibernOS application is built out of Oracle EBS COTS. So it's Oracle, EBS, Oracle database, OS is Red Hat Linux, but open source, which works well. So Oracle itself has their systems, their patches, everything that they do is on this open source Red Hat Linux platform. So it made a better candidate. And with the whole accelerator, one thing that I want to add is it's built for the application, at least that's what Oracle says, and so far we have seen it work. So.
Number 10, is CMS using virtualization products on top of Linux infrastructure in their data center? And if so, what virtualization platform is being used in the new Linux data center?
So as part of migration, or the transition itself, there are over 147 virtual machines that are there in the new data center now. Most of them running the VMware-based Linux systems. So that's the virtualization that we have used.
Number 11, are the new high-glass data centers hosted on Amazon government cloud? Would FedRAMP security controls apply to the new high-glass data center?
So no, the new high-glass data center is not hosted on Amazon.gov cloud. It's more like a private cloud that was built for this. If we look at more of a public cloud, and if we talk about public cloud or government cloud where it's multi-tenancy and pay-as-you-go model, the set of requirements that we had at this time at least was not, Amazon.gov cloud was not meeting it.
Yeah, when we started on the acquisition, there weren't at that time any FedRAMP, FISMA High certified cloud providers. So I know that there are now, but when we started the process, because acquisitions take a long time sometimes, especially complex ones like this, it wasn't an option. We started, and once we were down the road, we really couldn't make a U-turn and change.
But the fact that we moved from an AIX platform through a Linux-based platform using VMs, Exadata, is now going to make that journey easy whenever that happens.
All right. Thank you very much. We are 17 minutes behind schedule, and that's a trend I don't want to have continue. So we are starting again at 1 o'clock promptly, so eat your lunch quickly. We'll see you at 1.